Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm Tiffany, a retired librarian turned homeschool mom, and in this video we're going to be looking at this interesting book. So this is Big Ideas That Change the World, A Shot in the Arm by Dawn Brown. So, and it has this, a history of vaccine includes COVID-19 research. So that's what this is about. This is about the history of vaccines. Now this is a graphic novel, and it actually is pretty thorough. It's very, very interesting. It's dedicated to the COVID-19 workers. It came out in 2021. So this is a relatively new book. So it is done very, very well. The person leading you through the book series is a woman by the name of, Lady Mary Wotlery Montague. Now, she was known for taking the idea and popularizing inoculating people for smallpox, which was at her time period killing and disfiguring people like crazy. So she goes through kind of the history of smallpox and the inoculation and the spread of smallpox and through all that, and lots and lots of deaths because smallpox, and how different people were doing different things in China where they were shooting up scabs up people's noses and stuff like that. And moving on to pusses and just kind of disgusting things, and then kind of tells her story. And she married a diplomat. They went to, I think, Turkey, and they were inoculating people, so she got her baby done that, and then she convinced them in England to do the same. Her kids survived, and people thought she was crazy, but eventually they started doing that in London. And because of the princess, I think, who is this? Prince Caroline of Wales, who's the future queen of Great Britain. Trying to think what this is, 1700s. Did figure out when this was, 1700s. I don't know the British monarchy as well as I probably should, considering the amount of history tea time that I've watched. Check out those videos. That's more of the royal family. Moving on to this, it's talking about the inoculation. Now we get back to talking to Cotton Mather, who has issues, but he was inoculating people. People thought he was crazy. He kept doing it. They attacked him. But again, they realized it's working. So people aren't dying of smallpox. So they start getting what they call vaccinations. And then we jump a little bit further and start talking about cowpox. And that's really where the first vaccine for smallpox came from. Is they realized that milkmaids would occasionally catch the non-dangerous cowpox, and they wouldn't be able to get smallpox. So yeah, so they went to, I believe this guy's name was Platt. This is a guy in Germany. So he discovered this, started doing the pus on people, and more inoculating people with pox. Now we come to Edward Jenner. So she'd already kind of previously mentioned him. He's the one in the United States who did the exact same thing. Again, with the cowpox. And then he kind of figured this out, that cowpox, inoculating against cowpox, makes people immune to smallpox. So eventually he did some unethical experiments on prisoners and disabled people and his own family, and and they complained about it, but eventually they realized, okay, this works. And then of course there was no vaccine groups, so this is not new. People ranting about no vaccines and not wanting to be inoculated is not new. So again, we have more complaining people. And apparently the Supreme Court said, yeah, the country actually has the right to protect the people. So they have the right to force vaccines. So then we move on to Louis Pasteur. So, well, first we start off with this guy. So we hand another British person in 1654, Antony van Leeuwenhoek. Now what he did was he created the precursor to microscopes. And he discovered that there's a whole bunch of bacteria living in the water. So that was kind of the start. And then eventually we come to a man by the name of Koch, who discovered anthrax. Now, they still haven't discovered germ theory. But he was able to discover, using microscopes, anthrax. And then we deal with Louis Pasteur. Yes, as in pasteurize, which is things we do to get rid of bacteria in our things like our milk. So him and his wife worked together and eventually started creating a vaccine against anthrax. And they inoculated a bunch of animals because that's what it was killing. And then they started creating a vaccine for rabies, which we don't think about these days because it's still a thing. But yes, there's like a 4-shot series for rabies. I was in Romania for 2 years. One of my group mates on one of our last days in training got bit and had to get the 4 rabies shots, which apparently are really, really long needles. So she doesn't die, just in case, because they don't know if it was a rabid dog. Yeah, they did some unethical things on children. And then this is when they started creating vaccines for tetanus, diphtheria, plague, which is a bacteria, notice. These are all mostly bacteria-based. These are not viruses. Yellow fever, typhoid, and tuberculosis. For an odd piece of information, I didn't realize there was a vaccine for tuberculosis until I was pregnant and randomly looking up vaccines in other countries. And being vaccinated for tuberculosis is a thing in other countries, just not in the U.S. So obviously tetanus, diphtheria, we do not get vaccines for plague. I didn't realize there was a vaccine for plague. I know you can, but we have antibiotics, so we don't do a vaccine for plague. And basically people started living. But then we move on to our next person who I will bring it up. And we're talking about Roosevelt here and polio. So that brings us to the March of Dimes and sending dimes in to support research for polio. And one of the persons who got that information and some of that research was a man by the name of Jonas Salk. Now, I've covered him, and I'll cover him individually. I've already covered one children's book on him. I'm going to cover a more advanced book on Salk for this year of 2023. I'm filming this in 2022. But this is an overview. So Salk created a weakened live virus that was a shot in the arm. And then you do have another by the name of Savin who was doing it with a dead virus. The problem is, and noticeably the polio virus, they had some issues with it in the beginning and it killed some people because it wasn't as weakened as it should be. There were some bad batches, so people were kind of paranoid. And yeah, that happened. But again, this was in the past. That doesn't really happen anymore. By doing this, we got the basically the Clean Food and Drug Act and the acts that basically the processes that we have now to protect the vaccine creations. Vaccines are not dangerous. Repeat, vaccines are not dangerous. So, but they realized that the dead virus actually was, a lot of people remember getting liquid on their tongues with polio with like a sugar cube. That's what my mother remembers. And this was mentioned to me when I got a polio booster back before I left for the Peace Corps. So I got another polio booster as an adult. So just to be protected. But mostly what you get now is you get the weakened live virus. So the most weakened virus for polio. So you can't really get polio, but that's what's given out now. And yeah, my daughter's I think she may need another booster when she's 4. But again, we finally started figuring out what was going on. Now this part of the book talks about how the immune system works before we start talking about how vaccines work. So it explains in the pictures again how vaccines work and how vaccines do their job. And now it comes in to talking about Andrew Wakefield and the MMR, which is the measles, mumps, and rubella. Now, by this time, they had gotten rid of smallpox. So smallpox is gone. We were very, very close to doing that with the measles. And then came along moron. So Andrew Wakefield, if you're familiar with vaccine history, is the idiot, not a doctor, at least not anymore, who in order to get money claimed, specifically misrepresented research and claimed that the MMR causes autism. It doesn't. There's been dozens upon dozens upon dozens of studies. It doesn't cause autism. It's not a thing. He lost his medical license. He still rambles on. But essentially, it prevented us from getting rid of the measles, mumps, and rubella. So he screwed up 3 diseases. If it weren't for Wakefield, it's very possible that our children wouldn't need these vaccines anymore because the darn thing wouldn't exist. But it does because he was a greedy monster and wanted to sue and get money and basically use his own vaccine, which again was probably just off somebody else's. So he kind of screwed things up. He stripped his medical license, and it's not real. So now we're back to the vaccines. So now it has an entire chapter on COVID-19 and how it spread and what happened. A lot of us already know this, though it's good to review, particularly if you're reading this to your children years from now, to understand this point in history and how they brought this out. And that's kind of how it ends. It ends because I'm guessing this came out in like 2020. This came out in 2021. So the last thing it talks about is November 2020. Scientists were reporting positive results. Now, obviously, as of this shooting, this is 2022. We have multiple vaccines. My daughter's been fully vaccinated, and she's right before she turned 3. Me and my husband recently, as of this shooting, have gotten our 2nd booster, our 4th COVID shot. So yeah, and that's a whole different issue on that. But this is a really good book. Again, it's a graphic novel, so it probably is. It's still in the children's section. It's really good explaining, using pictures and words, the history of vaccines, how they work, what went on, and the whole history kind of the disease and what they were doing. And of course, it gives this huge history of smallpox. Mentions